So I see the little red light blinking. There we go. Welcome to Council Table today in August, and we have a wonderful speaker that I'm going to do in just a second. As I've laid out, we're going to talk about education for the first 30 or 40 minutes. We'll have some Q&A hopefully within that time. And then at 1:30 Eastern, we will go to prayer. We're roundabout about that time. But Suzanne, if you need to go past that time period, that's fine. I'll give it a heads up on that. So Suzanne Phillips, that's the lady that we're going to hear from today, co-host. And I've known Suzanne, gosh, I almost put it upwards of 10 years. We both knew each other through a mutual ministry called Cloud Walk, which is in Atlanta, or the metropolitan area there. And just come to know her heart and her family and have a high respect for her. Most of the people that come on Council Table, in particular those that are I've asked to be co-host, have a great thirst for Matthew 6, and that is seek ye first the kingdom of God, and then everything else will be added. And Suzanne exemplifies this. She goes passionately after God and lets him lead the way. And as I put in the couple of emails, if you had a chance to read them, she's heavily involved in the education space through many dynamics. One just being the foundation of the what's the academy's name?
It was Legacy Community Academy. We've merged now, but yeah, we founded a couple of academies.
And so just the hard work to put that foundation of a school together from 1 through 12, and then all the parts and pieces of that, but then also these other ministries she's got alongside of that. It's partnering to try to bring a holistic view between the home and education, which she's going to help unpack today and give us the key to education. So some of the things that are top of mind for you about education, I pray that the Lord will use this talk to help answer some of the questions that may be there and give you the key to take it into your areas of influence. So Suzanne, bring us the wisdom, the insight, the knowledge, and the power that we need to have to help take a broken education system that seems to be across America, and how can we fix it? So Great. Welcome today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. There are 4 million places that I can start, but I think I'm going to start with the question that you asked and the first word that came to my mind, and then the second word that came to my mind, because I think there's a balance in the responses. Some obviously were the warnings about what's going on, and others really line up with what the truth of education is. And so the first word that comes to my mind when people ask, what would you say about education? My word is infiltrated. It has absolutely been infiltrated. And so there's some things that we can talk about with that. But when I think about it from a kingdom perspective, the word that comes to mind is opportunity. And I think when things are disrupted, then we do have an opportunity. And, one of the things that I'm camping on a lot lately is, and I do this for parents. My audience is typically parents, but informed parents make informed decisions. And so the information that we need about how it's broken, why it's broken, and what is broken helps us then make informed decisions about all these other opportunities that are at our fingertips. So the background for me for just a couple of seconds is in 2011, I co-founded a school with my husband and another couple and one other gal here in the Atlanta area. It was a hybrid school and it was a K-12. And my background is fashion merchandising. I didn't really even like school. So I did this from a parent's perspective. The Lord put this on our heart. My husband has a finance background. One of the gals, another couple, had counseling, and her husband was a general manager. So all of this came at this endeavor from the heart of a parent. And it was birthed on my back deck one summer night, asking the question, begin with the end in mind. What is it that we want our kids to get from their education? And while I had been involved in public education, covenant Christian, non-covenant Christian, a little bit of homeschool, I had done the whole gamut. The question really was, at the end of this when we get ready to launch our children, what is it that we want to see them prepared with and for? And that turned us to the question, what if we just started a school? So we hired people that had the skill set for education, but the heartbeat really was from a parent's perspective. And what the dream was is that it would be a discipleship model of education. And that means that the classrooms aren't huge. It was training teachers and even administrators, which I will go on record saying that is a difficult thing to try to train an administrator who is an excellent educator and has been brought up with the skill set and the knowledge that we didn't have. But Jesus used the unlearned, right? And so we didn't have to unlearn anything. We were looking at it from the perspective of an end goal and a vision. And so training in our mind, what a discipleship model of education looked like, well, you have to go back and then understand what a disciple is and what is discipleship. And quite frankly, what we found with families having students from, huge mega churches all the way to home churches and everything in between, every denomination, every shape, every size and background. The one common denominator that we ran into a lot is no one knew what a true disciple was or how to disciple. So that's a problem when you want to create a discipleship model of education. So the bottom line is we had to sort of get to the basis of, you really can't divorce parenting from education, because education is discipleship and parents are called to disciple. And so that doesn't mean you have to teach algebra. My kids would have failed out of school if I'd had to teach algebra. But what it does mean is, who am I partnering with? Because when I turn my children over to somebody, that person is going to be to some degree discipling, because if discipleship isn't a drop off, it's not the Wednesday night with the donuts or the Sunday morning for 2 hours. That's all great. But discipleship, by definition and by demonstration, is walking with someone over the course of time, teaching them as you go. And so the idea was, it shouldn't be a big aha, but it was sort of a big aha. Well, if someone starts in kindergarten and you walk in a small community for 13 years, and the basis for what we want to accomplish is that they would know Jesus and know themselves, and we would do that through all the subjects. But the bottom line is that child is the subject, right? Math isn't the subject. The child's the subject. We're going to use math as a means to get to the child's heart, walk, teach, train. But if you do that for 13 years and you do it within a community of like-minded people, that is discipleship. And so we thought we really opened a school to reach the parents, to teach them how to disciple, because we knew that kids had to be somewhere. And what we found in doing that for several years was, at the end of the day, or the end of when they're graduating, we did exit interviews for every student for 10 years, the 10 years that I was involved. And in the exit interview, we always said, what was your favorite thing about Legacy? And 97% of the time, the student would say that I'm known. And we've gotten so far away from that, right? But that would be the heart of the Father. If we're walking, right, with Jesus over the course of time, if we're walking with the Father, the fact is I'm getting to know him and I'm getting to know myself through him. And so it's just not what the typical conversation is when you use the word education. I think there are a couple of reasons. Bill, let me know if you want me to, I don't want to just be throwing up. I can be very much a fire hydrant. So if anyone needs to pause me, just hit pause. If not, I will go like a racehorse.
No, you're fine. The little tip that Suzanne gave me before we got started was, when she starts talking Southern and getting loud, she's on a roll. So when y'all still hear that Southern thing, I may stop her, but no, I think you're fine. I think knowing this topic, Suzanne, if you want to go for, say, another 10 minutes on embellishing, some of the aspects, particularly between the home and discipleship, how that works as you see it, and maybe addressing a little bit of the problems that you see, that give people some realities of what you see that's going on in the school system. I think it's really good. I think Q&A is going to be real important for a lot of people today. So
okay, well,
another 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll share this just from a standpoint of like truly defining, because when we started with this endeavor, It was a partnership with the parents. It wasn't a drop-off location. That's one of the issues that I see and hear very consistently. It's something that I was convicted about years ago. I've been convicted about this in the area of government more recently. But in terms of parenting and education, generally speaking, I believe that we as parents have abdicated our responsibility to a church and to youth group pastors, many of whom are 23 years old and don't have children. And it doesn't mean that they don't have a place, right, to be the liaison, but it is a liaison. And so a huge heads up for me and a big warning for me is when a church says, hey, your children don't want to really talk to you. We understand them better. And so, we've got a younger group, but we have no parents overseeing the 23 to 28-year-olds that are overseeing the kids. That to me is a huge problem. That's abdicating to someone who doesn't actually have the perspective of a parent yet. Again, doesn't mean that they don't have a role. I also hear this all the time, and you hear it from teachers, that parents have abdicated the responsibility of education to the classroom, to the teacher. So teachers are feeling like they're counselors, and this is actually forced in a lot of cases now, but I'm talking 10 years ago when we were interviewing teachers. I'm a mom, I'm a counselor, I'm a cook because people don't bring the kids don't bring snacks, so they're starving, so I have to have food. Like, we've just sort of turned our kids over. And so when you think about what the role of a parent is, I go back often and say, well, let's define what a parent is, because if we're going to partner with someone, we're actually partnering around definitions. We've got to be on the same page.
When you're jumping into something.
We have to, like, if we don't define education, if we don't define our roles the same, that's where we get into trouble. And I find parents find this very interesting, but the actual definition, if you go back to the Latin root of the word parent, what a parent, the definition means to bring forth. And that doesn't just mean give birth. So when we would coach parents around this discipleship model, it's like your primary role in parenting is to bring forth who God created in the child that he has entrusted to you, his child that he's entrusted to you. So if the goal is to bring forth that child, it means, we're trying to discover and help that child discover who they are and who they've been created to be, and therefore what they're going to be gifted to do. But more, it's the identity piece of that. And in pulling that out of the child, which is very different than what education is doing now, right? It's not subduing someone saying this is who you're going to be, but there's a question mark behind it. Who are you? Oh my gosh, let's look at Susie Q. She's very talented in this. She's gifted. She's creative. She's, whatever. This is what you like. So that says this about you. This is how you think. This is the type of intelligence. We all have 8 different types of intelligence in our brain. Where it's not if you're smart, it's how you're smart. So it's a really different approach. But if a parent doesn't know that their role is to bring forth who that child is, then there's a tremendous pressure on kids, because the tremendous pressure that parents take on to tell them who they are and tell them what they have to do in order to accomplish what it is that they think they should accomplish. Massive pressure. And this was a decade ago. The second thing that's important is when you define education, education and academics, that's not the same definition. It's not the same thing. Academics is a part of education, but education is holistic. So when we talk about education and we interchange the word education in schools, not the same thing. School's a place. Education is defined by, again, if you go back to the Latin root, the Latin root's educo, which means to lead. And what that says is whoever's in front of your child educating them, discipling, is leading your child. Parents don't often think about themselves as leaders, but they're also not thinking about the teacher being a leader. And the 4 pillars that make education are instruction, right? Instructing someone to do it. That's a little bit different than teaching. Correction, that gets missed all the time. Students don't really even understand that anymore, why correction is part of education. The third one, this is what Art said, but it's taking knowledge to a place of understanding, which is wisdom. The goal isn't to have smart kids with a lot of knowledge. The goal is to give the knowledge so that you can move into a place of wisdom. And then the last one that pretty much everybody misses is the formation of habits or manners. That's generally speaking, that's gone, especially in public education. So if we're not doing those 4 things, the question that you have to ask a parent is, if those things aren't happening, is your child actually being educated? Now, I'm gonna end with this, and then I'll shift over into some of the stuff that's actually going on in schools right now. But if you go back to Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary and you dig into the definition of education there, and you go to, I believe it's Merriam-Webster's, the most recent one I looked at. Don't quote me on that piece. But that the definition of education under the word education in the more recent dictionaries is actually describing indoctrination. So if you want to change culture, you change language. Language is being changed. So if you go study what these definitions are of education and you really hold it up to what we know is indoctrination, and what I mean by that is education involves pulling information out, right? Indoctrination involves putting information in. It's not that you don't add information, but what are you doing with it? So critical thinking, to some degree, we're in trouble. So any questions there, because I can shift it and share a little bit of what's actually going on in the classroom right now. Let me just keep going. But you're on mute. Can y'all hear Bill?
No, you're right. I saw I thought it was clear, but yeah, I'm here. I park here for a second. I think you've given a lot of wisdom, the knowledge to go into wisdom. So I would like to park here a second just to give people a chance to maybe think through what they've just heard, yeah. And then if we want to tie it up here in a few minutes. First, I'll do this just to give somebody else a thought to think about. I did a talk a couple of weeks ago. Somebody asked me to speak to a group called the William Wilberforce weekend. William Wilberforce was the kind of the keynote politician in England in the 1800s who helped abolish slavery. And the 2 things that he felt that when he became a Christian that God put him on this earth to do, one was the abolition of slavery and all its content. And the second one was the reformation of manners. And if some of you grew up like I did, my mom said, watch your manners. Mm-hmm. And as Suzanne just keynoted for me, which was, I think, very interesting, that manners is that formation of habits. And when I looked at Wilberforce's time period, when England was at the preeminence of their country, they were the most economically powerful country. They were the most military competent country, but they were so depraved internally because of greed and corruption. And that's why America in part broke loose from them. But when I look at America today, this is where we are. We're not free as a country. And so I love it that education, part of it is to bring back that I from the Webster 1828, which is right in that William Wilberforce time period. That's what we need in America, particularly back in the home. So anyway, that's what lit me up. Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? I'll keep going. I think I'll go into a little bit of the actual curriculum that you see and some of the framework that is happening that parents maybe don't fully understand. It's hard, quite frankly, to fully understand it because there's such a web. And when asked the question, I had to give a talk in April to a pretty big crowd, and it was like a TED talk. I had 9 minutes. It's like the worst thing ever to try to cram information in like that. But you have to be real precise when you do that. And it forced me to kind of go to the heart of the matter. And I know Bill, you love that. But the question that I was asked to sort of address is, who is teaching your child? You can interchange, in my opinion, you can interchange that based on the definition of education, who's leading your child. And I think that, we would have said growing up, I'm 55, I'm about to be 56, growing up, when asked that question, even a few years ago, you would say Mrs. Jones in room, 203, who happens to be my neighbor. But if you don't understand the foundations, the accreditation agencies, the curriculum agencies, the legislators and the legislation, the unbelievable amounts of nonprofits that are involved, that are funding the curriculum, if you don't understand, first of all, that there is a web, second of all, some of the pieces of the web, then the reality is today, you do not know who is teaching your child because it's not the teacher. The teacher is in a position in most cases, this does not mean 100% in every district, in every school, because, you know, principals have some say and some are able to hold some of it off in different states and different districts. So it's not across the board, but I would say probably at this point, there's no school that's not being touched by some of what's going on. It's just, we're past that. Public schools. I also want to be clear that in some cases, very elite private schools are in even deeper to some of this. It's indoctrination. And then what I find in some of the smaller Christian schools that tend to hold it because they really are trying to disciple, they're kind of holding the line on, we're going to focus on Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. If the administrators of those schools don't understand what's going on, it seeps in and comes in ways that they don't know it's happening, like through an accreditation agency. So when you sort of look at, I think one of the big things that people need to understand is social emotional learning. And the reason that it's important to understand social emotional learning is because it's presented as a curriculum. That is not the case. It is not a curriculum. It is a framework. So when I say that social emotional learning is a framework, it means that it is coming into the classroom through counselors, through teachers, through curriculum, through supplemental resources that teachers bring in and gather that aren't just curriculum. Again, most of us think of when we talk about curriculum, we think about us going to school and getting a textbook that is sent home. The schools, I mean, the one-to-one with all the technology, textbooks are sort of obsolete. So you might get a textbook and have a textbook, but the use of textbook is very, very minimal. You might read 3 paragraphs out of a chapter to bring something in, but you're bringing in a lot of resources through technology. So when you think about social emotional learning, the premise of that is you're focusing on how a child feels and you're focusing on emotions, right? So what it does is, I like to give this example. So think about going to like your 6-year-olds being in circle time. And instead of going around saying, you know, what was the best part of your day yesterday? Or what was one way you were nice to your neighbor yesterday? Or something like that. The questions are about feelings. How do you feel about Susie Q? A lot of the questions are connected to what's going on in your home. And we're talking about 5- and 6-year-olds all the way up. Right? So it's invasive and the data is being collected at a rate that most people don't understand. So social emotional learning brings surveys into the schools. In most places, not in all, but in most places, you can opt your student out of surveys if you know that you can do it and if you know that they're happening. Most parents don't know that it's happening. But these surveys start very young, kindergarten is all the way up. And examples, they're in private school and public school, because if you're pushing STL, or STL is part, social emotional learning is part of what you're doing, part of what you've signed on to, this is just part of it. So an example would be asking a 6th grader, how many times have you thought about self-harm, depression, or suicide? And then it's 0. Okay, a seed has now been planted for a 6-year-old who's never considered suicide. These are regular. Another question that's very common is, how many times, you know, in the past 6 months have you sent a nude picture, a video, or a picture in lingerie? So just by asking that question, there is an assumption, which becomes a worldview. There's an assumption that everybody at some point is sending a nude picture, a nude video, or pictures in lingerie. So what's happening through this, in my opinion, but I think this is what happens. A worldview is being formed just by planting the seeds. We know you plant seeds, someone else will water it. So now you go over to TikTok and someone's sending this or talking about it, it's watered, and the enemy will grow that into someone's worldview. And so social emotional learning, the way I like to say it is, if we want our kids to live out a biblical worldview, if you're a believer who wants your children to walk out a biblical worldview, you have to be really aware of the other worldviews that are being formed so that you can speak into it. Social emotional learning, in my opinion, is breeding a worldview of an emotionalism. And emotionalism says that the most important influence, or the most important influence of right and best, is how I feel about something, right? How I feel, or my feelings towards something. The Bible very clearly says your heart's deceived. I mean, we don't lead, feelings are important, but they inform us so that we can make a decision. We can think about something and make a decision, but we don't make decisions on the feeling itself. Well, when you start with a 5-year-old and you go for 13 years and all you talked about is how you feel, and everybody else should feel how you feel when you feel it, and nobody gets, nobody should address you if it's going to make you feel bad. I know, we all know as adults, that's not going to go well because it won't stand in the real world. So social emotional learning is a big one. Then you get into comprehensive sex ed, which is atrocious and I believe demonic. It's coming in different waves as well. Some states have adopted comprehensive sex education as standard at this point, which means the teacher has to teach to it to some degree. Again, not every school, but comprehensive sex ed is not the sex ed we had growing up. It's not really based on biology. The Kinsey Institute, has anybody heard of Alfred Kinsey, or the Kinsey Institute out of Indiana University, which is still functioning? Okay, so the Kinsey Institute, the research from that, and if y'all want to watch a documentary so you understand this, the documentary is The Children of Table 34. Brace yourself and don't have kids in the room if you're going to watch it. It's not a long documentary. But the basis for comprehensive sex ed comes out of the research from Alfred Kinsey, which says that children are sexual from birth. And his research tortured children in order to try to come to this conclusion. And I won't go into any further detail because it's that bad. So we're looking at, here, comprehensive sex ed is coming out of that. The number one funding arm that is getting this curriculum into schools and across our nation, the number one producer and funder of sex education in the US and I think in the world is Planned Parenthood. So this is curriculum, and it's curriculum that teaches a 5-year-old that you can choose your gender. By 3rd grade, there's a smorgasbord of here are the genders you can choose from. 1st grade, you're already talking about masturbation to some degree. You are teaching children how to get contraceptives without parental consent, which is going to then lead to, if it's not already, hormones, and I would hazard to guess abortions on site, because schools are putting health clinics on their campuses at this point. Georgia's almost up to 200 of them. And those are public-private partnerships. So if you don't understand the legislation about mental health and what's connected to it, and you have a health clinic on site, Emory goes in, puts a health clinic, and all of a sudden the legislation says the counselor can, take the student on site. There are a lot of problems with legislation. I will say, so now we're teaching kids this comprehensive sex ed. We're telling them how you feel. If you feel like a boy, you can be a boy, right? In California, and I believe it's past, I think it's the age 14 in Washington and age 12 in California. I think it's age 12, I think in Minnesota. Several states are moving, but some of the states have passed it. California has passed legislation that at 12 years old, if your parent does not affirm you and you go to a school counselor, and you tell them my parents won't affirm, that child may not come home from school. They will go into a government facility, like a home. And basically your child has put themselves in child protective custody, and the state can give hormones, can move the child towards transition, and the parent has zero say. If you don't affirm, state takes over. It's passed. So the important thing is you have to understand how it's operating with the school and what's going on in the schools, because the schools are sort of a breeding ground if you have administrators that are, saying yes to all this content. So that's, and when I say that is scratching the surface, I mean, that is scratching the surface. And I don't know how I spent almost all of session down at the Capitol 3 years ago. I didn't even know what happened in the Capitol. I mean, that was so far from my wheelhouse, but not just for education legislation, but for mental health legislation. And when you start reading some of these mental health bills, even the one that was going to pass in Georgia, when I say scary, I don't even know how to explain it. I don't have time today. But you have to understand the legislation that's going on in the health realm, because when you look at Learning 2025, which is what the Association of Superintendents is pushing for or creating, it's a partnership between education and health with the CDC. And I can't remember, I think it's about 100 schools are going to roll out Learning 2025 starting this fall as test pilots. So it's interconnected. There's so much behind the scenes that's connected. It's very difficult to keep up, but there are a lot of people doing a lot of work. And I will say to you, you would be shocked at how many of them 3, 4, 5 years ago were moms who were playing tennis. And they started to sort of, this doesn't make sense. I can't get the information I need. Oh, let me look at starting to look at legislation. And it is the average citizen from a family perspective. I will say that in most of this, it has nothing to do if you're conservative or liberal, if you vote Republican or Democrat. When it gets down to the family and what's going on in schools, it is across the board a no. And it's not all just Christian. I mean, Muslims are rising up. People because this is value-based education. And when you start to mess with a parent's right to have their own value system, it starts to get real serious real fast. It takes, what does the Bible say about, in one generation we can lose it all? And what we're looking at is our children's thinking and beliefs being formed around values that us on this call would not align with, but most Americans wouldn't, and most people across the world don't. This is a worldwide thing, right? But their beliefs and their thoughts will become their behaviors and their actions. And so when we get worldview messed up and it's not aligned and we are way off on this stuff, we have to consider what our role is as believers to confront. And that's sort of where we are. And I want to say one thing to, is it Ursel? Ursel. I think someone was talking about fathers, or I don't.
Oh yeah, that's him.
Right. Okay. Well, you probably heard me say amen. I will tell you, because I've been in the room. Most of these school board meetings that you'll see the mamas. Mama bears are not messing around. They are reading pornography that curls most of our hair. I mean, I don't even want to say it. They're standing up, but I will tell you, you can watch it in a room when a daddy shows up or a pastor shows up. And he reads from these books that our children are being exposed to. And I mean, 7th grade graphic rape scenes. I just can't even tell you what our children are being exposed to. When men show up in a boardroom and they act like a man and they stand firm, and I'm not talking about losing their mind. I just mean standing firm with conviction. You can literally watch the school board. It's just, God has called men to a position. That's just all there is to it. And I'm telling you, the mamas have been leading, the women have been leading. as the men start to step in and step out, there's shifting. There's some shifts happening. It's happening in Southern California, and it's pretty incredible. But it's a real thing, and so I commend you for what you're doing, for dads to understand their role, and the privilege of the role to be able to protect and provide for their families. I'm not saying moms need to back off, because I think intuitively we know this is not going to go well, and we are sounding the alarm. I'm telling you, hello, 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 hello. This is not going to go well. You are losing your children. You're going to wake up and not know what happened. But when a husband or a dad or a grandfather or a concerned citizen who's a man hears it and says, I'll show up and it'll be my voice, tell me. The beauty of that relationship working together, of women being able to say, this is not okay, but I need your voice. I'm telling you, I have cold chills all over my body. The power in that, and it's been missing. And I think God's doing it, but I'm telling you, we're behind the 8 ball. He can move, but we need to move.
Amen.
Sorry to get Southern there. You heard me.
Ursel texted me and said he had to jump off. He didn't jump off just because what you said.
Okay.
Yeah. That's awesome. We're at the perfect timing here. We can continue to go on because we love the content you're bringing, Suzanne, but feel free to go if you need to jump off at 1:30 or in other words, right now. We'll stay on, and Suzanne, I don't know how long you can stay on, but we do want to pray for you at the end. So how much longer do you have?
I have a little bit more time. I'm okay.
Should we, let me just take anybody got a thought or question that you'd like to ask Suzanne before she has any other final thought?
I do. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hey, Liberty.
Hey.
Yeah, we can hear you wonderfully.
Awesome. Suzanne, this is like so amazing. I have to go back to the beginning because I came midway, and in my prayer group, we've just been talking about kids and the attack that has been on kids lately. A friend of mine had a nephew who he was just yelling out in his sleep. And so that for us, we were like, okay, something's happening. And not to say we haven't realized that there's something happening with kids, but it's just this alarm sounding off. So my question to you is, while you're talking about the education system, I work in media. So I'm trying to connect the dots to what that being my mountain, how I can have more impact, or I know, yeah. So I'm curious as to your thoughts.
I think with media, are you talking about
children's content? So I stopped pursuing that for a bit because I was trying to get funding for things. And I'm just thinking about whatever influence I have. I also, from a mom perspective, I'm always talking and helping support moms. So I'm just curious as to how or what additional influence, and I have a 9-year-old, what additional influence, what else I can do, because this is fascinating.
It's a great question, and I'd be happy to jump on another call with you. But the thing that comes to mind, I think it's the Lord, is something in the past 3 months that has just been burning in my soul is the need for understanding around different worldviews. And when I mean that, I mean, what is victimism? What is emotionalism? What is autonomy? What is, an independent worldview? What are these things that come against a biblical worldview? And I don't think the churches are teaching it. And I don't mean that in a negative context. I just mean, I think we're so far away from understanding what does it look like to have a worldview that is victimism, because it doesn't align with the word of God. And I think parents understanding that and knowing what to look for and what to listen for so that they can correct. Because if you go back to those 4 pillars of education, one of the pillars is correction. Right? It's not punishment. I want to correct the way you're thinking, because at the end of the day, if you keep thinking that way, it's not going to work out well for you because it doesn't align with the truth. So I think digging into different worldviews and understanding them and being able to break that down to a bite-sized piece so a parent can understand it and digest it and identify and discern for the purpose of bringing their child back to a worldview would be phenomenal. And I I don't know how to bring that about necessarily, but it's very much stirred up in me that it would be helpful for parents, because I don't think the parents know, right? So
Right.
if the parents learn, if they're informed, then they can inform their children. But I don't think we've spent a whole lot of time on that. It gets really into apologetics, and then people don't think that's for children. And to me, it's a smaller dose before you go deep into apologetics. And I think it would be a tremendous help. And I'd be happy to talk further with you about it if you're curious.
Yeah, that's good. And pretty much what I heard from you is go ahead and put your mask on first. And that's
Always.
it.
Right? Parents don't know their leaders, right?
Yeah.
Because we think we're a parent, but a leader by definition just means go first.
Right.
And so, I mean, Jesus went first. We're an image bearer. We're following something that's original. We're not original, right? We're the bearer. So parents learning to go first and to be in relationship with God. I always say be a child of the Father before you're a parent to your child. And
Thank
it's the same thing with all this information. It's like we have to digest it and understand it so that we can make it palpable for our children.
Right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, Suzanne, I have to say, first of all, I apologize for my disruptiveness at the beginning.
Oh, no worries.
But I just want to say what a great presentation you made. But on the other side, I didn't hear a lot that encourages me today. Too many times you said you need to understand, or you're going to have to. And so my real question is, how do we encourage you?
Oh, thank you. And yes, and I hope that I don't come across not hopeful. 30 minutes is a short time to try to get content out. I will say that there is hope, obviously in Jesus, but also parents are waking up and they're doing the hard work. And so there are changes happening around. It's just a lot of information. I think for me, just encouragement and prayer. I've been asked to step way out of my comfort zone and confront some of these issues head on through a podcast that's going to launch in September that is going to reach an audience that's far more broad than I'm used to. And I'm trusting the Lord, but I'm going there. I mean, I'm going there in the conversations to places that are exposing. And so I would just say prayer coverage would be amazing. And I think the other thing would be just, if you find this conversation helpful, I'll be going deeper in those interviews and that podcast and helping people, helping to get that out so that people can hear from people on the front line. Like, this is actually happening in the classroom. I'm a teacher. This is what's happened. I had to leave. And I think helping parents just be informed, and grandparents and the general citizenry just be informed. If you can help me do that, I think that that's an encouragement.
You know, somebody said to me the other day that the kingdom is growing like it's never grown before. So you stop and think about that.
Yep.
And then I got thinking about how many people that I know that are like you, that are doing a piece of this thing out there. So just as an idea, how many Suzannes are there out there today that you know about are doing something in this area?
Oh, so many. And I will tell you, I find that my sweet spot, and I think it's important for us to be in our sweet spot as a body.
Mm-hmm.
But I have found it's so fun over the years. I'm a connector. And that's one of the things that my whole life, I'm a connector. I connect ideas, I connect people. I love to connect. And so my sweet spot tends to be able to hear the legislation, hear the curriculum, hear all these different pieces and connect the dots for people. But the people that I'm learning from, I mean, their moms, their dads, their legislators, they're people that are putting their families in harm's way, to be quite honest, doing the work. And there are hundreds of thousands at this point. I mean, I have a dear friend that ran for that ran for the House federal, and she's a mom, and she just said, you know what? I have to do something. I can't just watch us lose our country. And she stepped out, and what God is doing in her life. She's running the Freedom Caucus Network here in Georgia, and it's just stunning. I mean, we were all going to the grocery 3 years ago, and just our normal daily life. So there are so many people who've gotten a taste of what's happening and just gone for it. And so be encouraged in that. We just need it to grow.
Suzanne, I have a question for you. This is Sam in New York. So one of the challenges, at least here in New York, is that there's not enough basically Christian schools. There's literally just one in Manhattan. And I kid you not when I say all the pastors send their kids there, mostly because they get half off on tuition. But it's just one that basically at least hasn't gone woke, as to say. So it's the last holdout. My friend sends their kids there. So him and I are strategizing. He's a Google engineer, and we're talking about he's big into education. And we're like, trying to bring more up here to New York. We're looking at like the Hillsdale curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. Is there anything there's room, kind of a middle ground? The problem with when you go into deep blue areas is if you bring in just a pure Christian school, it's not quite sellable. But if you bring in a classical education system, like for example in Hillsdale, K through 12 program, it's a bigger selling point because it's like we're going back to the basics of Western classical education. Maybe we'll sprinkle in a few things. Do you think there's a way to kind of move our ideas forward, but kind of meeting people in the middle, which is like just get back to basics in a very strong sense?
Absolutely. I think, the classical model is great. Hillsdale is awesome. I will tell you, I just landed this interview this morning and I can't quite believe it happened. But Tim Kennedy is major patriot, but there's a model that's about to be launched called Apogee Schools. I'm going to interview him today. When I get more information about it, I can give it to Bill to get to you, or we can connect. But I think he's a Christian. I don't know that much about him, but it's more about character, patriotism, reading, writing, and arithmetic. So it's not really, I don't think it's really being built on a biblical worldview. And I do think that will reach those that just want to get back to the basics and train character. And I was talking to somebody about it last week and said, it's probably not what you want because you really want the biblical worldview, but if it's something that you could start where the parents who are believers that are there had a great content that they're doing at home and they're discipling at home with the biblical worldview, at least the children are not being taken off course with information. It's neutral ground, right? Math is math. Writing a 5-point or a 5-point paper is writing a 5-point. It's neutral ground because you're learning skills, and it can be infused at home with the biblical worldview. The problem with what's happening right now in these schools that have been hijacked with this agenda is they're training worldviews that absolutely oppose a worldview. It's not just about academics, it's an agenda. And so I think if it's a neutral, where you're back to reading, writing, arithmetic, and character, it's neutral ground, so a parent can then come in and teach their values. It's hard to compete with schools that are teaching values that are telling your children that your parents don't understand what's going on. They're not safe, and becoming the family, and they're using that language. We're your family. That is literally in the whole child agenda. They're trying. It's the family. So I think that's a great course of action, and I can get the information to you about this.
Yeah, I'd love to do that as well, as perhaps maybe a sidebar after this or at some point in the future to talk more about this, because that's something we're interested in bringing to New York, because there's a high demand. Not the dropout rate, but the public school rate of children, basically parents pulling the kids out of public school system, K through 12, has dropped here in New York. I think by at least by 10% or something crazy like that. And whether it be moving out of New York City or just going to private school, there is a huge demand up here. Let's put it this way, for private schools. So it's something we're kind of thinking about but this is not our space either. I work in television and film. He's a Google engineer. We're just trying to solve a problem that eventually he's going to run into if the last Alamo of a private school goes woke. He's out of luck. So. He's looking long term.
Well, be encouraged, because I wasn't in this space either. Again, I was in retail and business, and running all of that, and then a stay-at-home mom. And so there's so many opportunities, and there's so many ways to skin a cat, and it's great in terms of innovation, because there are a million ways to do it, and there are people that are doing it. I will also say one of the concerns that we all need to be concerned about is teachers are leaving like crazy because they can't teach. And so
Yes.
3/4 of our states have a shortage, and I mean a major shortage on teachers. It's hard to even find them for a little private school that I'm consulting with right now, because they're leaving. But what they're doing is they're forming pods. Like there are people that are leaving that are true educators that would be, if they could get the funding, they know how to be a principal of a small group of people. So that innovation is so exciting. So people like you who are thinking about it, connecting with people who know what they're doing and just need the space to do it. There's so many options there.
It's a great word. To your point, Samuel, and for everybody here, I'll put together an email probably by Friday that connects everybody, and then and Suzanne, you can respond back to that email with your content where people can get a hold of you. Also, I would encourage you to be on the watch for Suzanne's podcast. It'll start up in September, which I'm sure will have a lot more content about various things that we've talked about today.
Yeah.
Can I'm sorry, Bill, can I just make a quick comment? A lot of
on.
people were upset. Well, obviously, a lot of people were upset when COVID hit. But COVID, I heard, opened the eyes of parents, like
Oh, for sure.
to really see what the kids were learning. So that's I mean, it's not good that all these people died from COVID. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that it allowed parents to be aware of what their kids were being taught. So that's a good thing of what COVID did.
Yeah, what the enemy meant for harm, right?
Yes.
God really used it in a powerful way, and I think it's where we are in the timeline, and I think God's turning the hearts of the parents back to the children, the hearts of the fathers back to the children, the hearts of the children back to the father, and
Yes.
he doesn't waste anything. So there's a lot of good that's come out of this.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I just wanted to say I stuck a couple resources in the chat. I know, Suzanne, like you just wanted to literally get us out. I feel like you did a really good job at waking us up today. I ran a homeschool co-op for 8 years. I homeschooled my kids from 0 all the way through high school. And I will tell you, it was a whole experience. But something that I have learned is that God has placed in our kids, we get to pull it out. God shows us, right? It's kind of like he's planted seeds in our kids. And as parents, we get to cultivate and pull that out of them, teach them who they are. And we can see in our culture that parents are not doing that. They are not, telling them who they are, showing them who they are. So I love how you said that, just like we as parents are to, pull out in what God has placed in them, right? And that is truly our job. Something that I love to do is teach kids how to learn. Yeah. I don't want to just educate them. I want to teach them how to learn, because if they know how to learn and they know how to go research for themselves, they're not going to believe and just take what the teachers are teaching them. They, pastors constantly say, don't take my word for it. Go research it yourself. That is what we should be doing in teaching, is don't take their words for it. Go research it yourself. Go find out why you believe what you believe, and be a student of learning. Don't, have joy. We've got to put joy back in learning as well. So I don't know. I realize I'm super passionate about this, and that I mean, honestly, for 22 years, I homeschooled and ran a homeschool co-op for 8. And it was honestly something that I was like, Lord, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I sat on it for a whole year before I actually said yes to running the co-op. But it's amazing when we say yes, the Lord brings the support that we need. He opens the doors that we need. He's just looking for our yes. And that's what we all should be doing here today, is just saying yes to the Lord. How can I help these teachers? How can I come alongside them? This Axis, AXIS, honestly, we can't keep up. There's so much information. It's overwhelming for parents. So I feel like this organization, Axis, really lays it out for us. It sends you an email, what's going on in the world, how we can be asking good questions to our kids. Amazing. And then the other resource I gave was Her Voice. And I just went to this conference here in Portland, and she is literally encouraging mamas. You said mama bears. This is what this is. Mama bears rising up, that we have a voice, that we need to start talking and standing up for our kids. So I just tossed those two in the chat here because that's what came up when you were talking. But yeah, it's time. It's time.
Awesome.
Lee, I was just looking at I guess the lady you said, anyway, it says, don't mess with our kids. is the hashtag. That's awesome.
It's great.
Anybody else? Thoughts?
Bill, this is Mike. Are there certain organizations that we should be aware of that are working across the states, different states, the nation, or whatever, that are, looking at what these schools are doing and that we can tie into to learn more and how to help influence things? I mean, I've got a couple of grandchildren. I'm always concerned about what they're doing.
Yeah, some of them that are strong from a legislative standpoint, Moms for Liberty is one, and Moms for America. I work with a group that they've been with one group. They're forming another one to offer more solutions, and so I think they're going to be launching their latest website. It's going to be called Freedom in Education, and I can put that in the email when Bill sends it out. They are powerhouses. I mean, the research they've done, it's just incredible. So I can put some of those resources down. The other thing, I'm on Instagram, if anybody's on there, under Beacon Parent. And I connect people to resources all over the country all the time. And so if you follow me, I'm typically, connecting you in different states with different things that are going on. So I can share some of that, but I would say Freedom in Education, Moms for Liberty, and Moms for America would be a good start.
Okay,
Suzanne,
thank you.
Suzanne, did everybody hear Suzanne? On my side, it circled out because it looked like her. Did everybody hear Suzanne?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was clear. Yeah, it was good.
Okay, it could be me then. I'm sorry. I'm glad. I'll be quiet. On my side, it circled out and I couldn't hear it. It's okay. Anybody else? And Suzanne, could you put those resources in the chat and I'll pick them up?
Yep.
Final thoughts. I'll make I'll close out this portion, then I'll make a comment or two, and then we'll go to prayer. How about that? Does that sound good for everybody? Any final thoughts? Okay. Thank you, Suzanne, for coming today. I know, like somebody said, you've just awakened us and helped us to kind of get a better, as you said, worldview of what's really going on, and particularly from a biblical standpoint. So thanks for coming today and continue to keep us informed as God leads. So thanks for that. And we'll close out today.
Okay, great.